Hello again. Today I'm pleased to share with you an interview with Dr. Bill Ripple, who was really the spark behind the World Scientists' Warning to Humanity Second Notice, and the several other warnings that have been published since by the Alliance of World Scientists. The interview was conducted by Alison Green, who took over for me as Executive Director of the Scientists' Warning Initiative, the public face of the Alliance of World Scientists, when I went into a short-lived semi-retirement intended to allow me to subdue the cancer I'm currently dealing with. Appreciate your watching and subscribing. Thank you.
Welcome to Scientists Warning TV. I'm Alison Green, and I have taken over as the new Executive Director of Scientists Warning, which many of you will know from our previous things that we've put on our channel. We are dedicated to protecting life on Earth and raising warnings about the climate crisis, the ecological emergency. Please do take a minute to subscribe to our channel if you've watched this and you'd like to get some further notifications about our new items. Then please do subscribe and we will send you those automatically. We're called Scientists Warning, and I thought that we could not have a better first guest on my new Heroes in Science series than Professor Bill Ripple, who was the author of the second Warning to Humanity and the recent climate emergency paper. So it's a great honor to be talking to Bill today, who is a distinguished professor of ecology at Oregon State University, and very apt as well, given that today, June the 5th, is World Environment Day. So I can't think of a better guest and a better day to have this interview. So Bill, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about yourself, about your background, and how you came to be an ecologist. I understand one of your interests is in researching wolves and apex predators. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your background and who you are.
Well, thank you, Alison. It's great to be here today. And I've always been interested in nature and the environment. And anyway, that carried through my university education. And I eventually ended up studying lots of different types of systems. I worked on spotted owls in the Pacific Northwest of the United States for a number of years, and they're an endangered species, and so that was quite interesting. And I also soon after I finished the spotted owl work, I got interested in a project in Yellowstone National Park. So back in 1996, I became aware of a mystery, and this is a scientific mystery, where the trees in Yellowstone were declining. These are aspen trees, and nobody really knew why they were dying off and not regenerating. So we went out there and we cored the trees, and we were able to do a tree ring study, and we found that the aspen trees died off about the same time that the wolves were killed off. So we developed this theory that wolves affect their prey, and their prey affects the plants. Therefore, wolves indirectly affect the plants. So I've been working on that project for over 20 years, and but interestingly, I've been feeling very strange the last few years, in that the news about the global environmental situation is just seems like it's getting worse and worse. So we have this, what I call the convergence of crises. We have a biodiversity crisis where we're probably in the 6th great extinction now. And that's very troubling. We have a climate crisis that seems to be getting much worse and worse than predicted by scientists. And then we have all types of other types of environmental issues like a scarcity of fresh water. And we have huge wildlife conservation problems.
Okay.
We have all kinds of these environmental things that have been bothering me. So I decided, rather than just enjoy myself doing ecological field work, I would transform myself into a science and conservation advocate. So that's why I started on this new path in 2017.
60% of the large carnivores in the world are threatened with extinction. And here you can see a list of those that are threatened. And this was shocking to me. I always heard about problems with different species, but I didn't know that most of them are threatened, including the bears and the canids and the felids and the otters.
So back in 1992, when the warning to humanity was published, and I'm just going to read a little bit about that and ask you a little bit about it. So in late 1992, the late Henry W. Kendall, former chair of the Union of Concerned Scientists, Board of Directors, wrote the first warning, World Scientist Warning to Humanity, which begins, human beings and the natural world are on a collision course. And a majority of the Nobel Prize laureates in the sciences signed the document, and about 1,700 of the world's leading scientists appended their signature, which is hugely powerful. You know, you've got the world's leading scientists and Nobel laureates. And I looked at that article again today, and it calls for action now, and it talks about critical areas such as atmosphere, oceans, water resources, and so on. And for you as a scientist, having looked at that, because you must have been aware of that at the time, were you aware of that article, and did it have impact at that time?
As far as I know, that 1992 warning had very little impact on policy globally. One thing is that that's 92 is before the internet became widely used. So Henry Kendall was able to get signatures through the mail system. So that was quite a feat, because he got quite a few important signatures on his 1992 warning. But then I've been researching Kendall and the 92 warning, and I found that they tried to do a press release when they released it. They did not actually publish it. It was just an open letter. And they asked the press to attend a press conference in New York City. And there was not much press. I think one television network covered it, and there's still a recording of that out there. But like, for example, the New York Times refused to even write anything about it.
That's astonishing.
And since it wasn't published in a journal, it really was forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1997, in 2017, I was giving a lecture at the University of California, and I was describing the world population issue. And one of the attendees in that lecture talked to me afterwards, and he said, "Thank you for talking about population issues, which most scientists don't." And he mentioned the 1992 warning also talked about human population crisis. And I read that for the first time in February of 2017, and I was struck. And I realized that it's been exactly 25 years since the first warning to humanity, and that since then, there should be good global environmental data over time that I could plot. And then I thought, well, maybe I could pen a new warning to humanity. So that was just conceived all of a sudden in February of 2017, and by November it was published with 15,000 signatories.
Yeah, and that was quite a wake-up call. The very fact that the scientific community had to issue a second warning because the first one wasn't sufficient. And it's interesting what you say about obviously the dissemination of the first one was hampered, I guess, by the internet not being what it is today and so on. But even so, one would think that something as stark as that in '92 would have had more impact, and clearly it didn't. So I think for you in 2017 and other scientists around the world, it must be absolutely galling to look back and think that these messages have been issued again and again and again with little impact. So going on to the 2017 paper, the second warning to humanity, I think you sort of explained something about why you came to do that. Can you just summarize for us what the article actually says?
Well, what we did in the 2017 paper, that second warning to humanity, we picked up on the topics of the first warning. So we had, and then we made a set of graphs that relate to the first warning. And so we wanted to be able to track how we have done over the last 25 years. So we plotted population, human population, and we plotted marine fisheries, and we plotted wildlife in terms of the decline of vertebrate species and the abundance of vertebrate species. We plotted the increase in ruminant livestock, and we plotted the increase in greenhouse gas emissions and ocean dead zones. And these are all topics that were mentioned in the 1992 warning. And now we actually put graphs and numbers to it. And I was personally just shocked that everything was getting much worse, except for one topic that Kendall and the 92 people worked on, and that is the ozone layer was much, much better by 2017. So we had that glimmer of hope that we can make proper decisions and behaviors, but most everything has gotten much, much worse. And we published that, and it got a lot of attention, and we had more than 15,000 scientists from around the world sign that new warning.
Yeah, and that's a huge number. So to go from 1,700 endorsing the one in '92 up to 15,000, and I know that more people signed on after. And it's interesting. Do you get a sense that the one thing that improved was the ozone hole, the ozone layer, that showed some improvement, and I remember that being reported in the news. But what wasn't reported was the fact that other things were getting so much worse. Do you think that the rate at which things are getting worse, do you think it's accelerating?
Yes, yeah, I would call it a great acceleration of
right. Okay.
of these issues. Yes, it is. And it seems like on topics like climate change, the scientists are underestimating how bad it's going to be at any certain time, and they keep revising the estimates. So yeah, I think it's to the point where I'm spending most of my time just working on these kinds of issues. I'm very concerned.
So I think one of the phrases that we hear again and again in the press is faster than expected, worse than expected. So we see the frequency of the fires, the wildfires in Australia, for example, just increasing, and they're becoming more and more catastrophic. They're lasting for longer, which is obviously pretty devastating. And I think for the ordinary person who doesn't really understand the data, they're not as close to it as you and the scientists are. But one of the questions I hear people asking a lot is, well, how bad is it really? And how do you go about, as a scientist, how do you communicate to ordinary people how bad things really are? Because people don't necessarily understand things like changes in CO2 levels. They don't understand what the loss of Arctic sea ice might mean. So how do we explain to people how bad it really is?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a difficult one. I give presentations, and I try to achieve a balance in terms of uh, giving the scientists warnings and which scare people somewhat, at the same time giving them some hope. But in terms of one little story I can tell you is for the last 3 years, I've been keeping track of what the scientists are saying a little bit more privately. And more, I'm seeing scientists say things like large areas of the earth will become uninhabitable because of climate change. I'm hearing some distinguished scientists saying things like, oh, our future climate may only support 3 billion people or even fewer. So these are simple concepts, but one issue that they have is that there's a lot of uncertainty about this. And another one is it's off into the future, of which doesn't get the attention that an immediate deadly pandemic would get.
So you wrote this paper. It was endorsed by huge numbers of people. Were you hopeful that it might trigger some significant changes at this point? Was there anything that gave you hope that this might trigger some significant changes? It might impact policy. It might be heard.
Yes. This was my first venture into science advocacy and conservation advocacy at a very large scale, and it changed my life, Allison. Ever since November 13th, 2017, my life has changed. The mass media did really a good job of covering the paper, and social media took off with it also. And there are a number of things that happened after publishing that paper. There is the citizens advocacy group, Scientists Warning, got started. There's a documentary film about the paper and my work with it and our work. A documentary film is in the works. There is the development of a new scientific organization called the Alliance of World Scientists was started. And I'm heavily involved in operating that organization. And for example, we are now writing narrow focus scientist warning papers since the second warning came out in 2017. And there's a lot of papers being written and published with scientist warning as the theme. So I get a lot of emails from scientists in other countries now, and it is very rewarding to see the positive response I'm getting. They're telling me they want to help. They want to work on changing not just people's behavior, but even more importantly, the way governments can function and policy at the global scale and the national and international scale. We're looking, I think the problems we have are so severe that we need to have systemic changes in the way that we function as humanity on planet Earth. So this takes national, international policy changes. So there have been, just as one scientist trying to make a difference, I'm extremely pleased at the result. But on the larger scale, I'm much more cautious about how optimistic I am that we're actually going to be able to turn the boat and head in a different direction.
Yeah, and it must be, I mean, I think for you in particular, being, situated in the US, and, here you are, a really strong advocate for things that need to be done, at the same time witnessing these horrendous rollbacks of every environmental law policy that has been passed. And for you and your fellow scientists, it must be absolutely galling to be trying to take steps forward and then find that you're in a sense taking a step backwards because of all of these policy reversals. The scientists are sometimes criticised, aren't they, for not raising their voices, and there is this sense that there's a kind of mainstream almost sort of narrative which is conservative, around the science. And I just wondered if you have a view on that, because when I speak to scientists, it seems to me that they are telling the truth, they are telling it as it is, and that there isn't some kind of watering down of that truth. Do you have a view on that?
Well, one thing I'm noticing is scientists are more and more willing to tell it like it is and to speak out more than they used to. So I'm seeing a trend of scientists speaking out, and I think that is essential, especially for mid and senior level career scientists that have the experience and the knowledge. And I see them stepping up. They are a fairly highly trusted group for citizens to look to for facts and scientific information, and I'm encouraged.
And you've been working tirelessly. So in 2017 we had the second warning to humanity, and then all the other things you've done since. And then late last year you published as if a second warning wasn't enough, this time scientists declare climate emergency, which makes us think, what more can scientists possibly do? Now they've sounded the alarm, now they're saying it's an emergency. And that paper, when it was published back in November, it made the headlines around the world. And I remember watching the news in the UK and looking at the news stories around the world, in the US and Australia. It really made the global headlines, and it was massively significant. I just want to look at the paper, because a lot of my scientist colleagues said it was a great piece of work, because again, you've done the research and you've presented all of these amazing charts and figures that show very clearly how things are still getting worse. And you outlined 6 steps in that paper, which are it's like a roadmap in terms of what needs to happen. I just wondered if you could maybe talk us through those 6 steps.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you, Allison, for your kind words about the paper. First of all, a little bit of background information. What I learned on the second warning that we put out in 2017, I used that knowledge to do this newer paper about a scientist warning of a climate emergency. So that experience really helped, and I was surprised that the response to the climate emergency warning that we just put out was so much bigger than the response to the second warning in 2017. That was quite interesting. So anyway, let me just back up a little bit and tell you that we did really well with the 2017 warning, and we were going along in 2018, and then again by early 2019, I was feeling really deep down that is there anything that I could do, like a one-time thing to help with the climate crisis? It seemed like the climate change and the climate crisis was getting so much worse that I just wanted to try something. And I thought, okay, and I was giving a speech in Portland, Oregon, with a congressperson from the U.S. House of Representatives, and he was writing a bill to submit to the U.S. Congress to declare a climate emergency. So he and I talked, and I titled this new paper Climate Emergency, and it really took off. And my co-authors and I gathered as much data on the climate as we could, both in the behavior of humans that affect climate change and then the climatic response. So we have two main variables. It's a very short text. This paper is available on the Bioscience website free, just like the 2017. So all your viewers can read it for themselves if they want. So we plotted all the charts in a very simple fashion. And again, we're finding that when we look at these vital signs of climate change, that things are in big, big trouble. And we published this straightforward story where hopefully everyone can understand. But the main thing that I want to get across today is that this looks so serious that small or piecemeal fixes don't seem likely to solve this problem. What I believe we need is a revolution of systemic changes in how humans operate on planet Earth. And you'll see this when I mention the 6 steps. So these are as big a scale as we could think of that would directly affect the sustainability of humans on planet Earth with a climate that would be habitable for us. Number 1 is energy. So we talk about the need to eliminate fossil fuel combustion and substitute with other forms of energy. So that is our number 1 issue. That makes a lot of sense, and it's very much needed. Then number 2, we listed air pollution. And a lot of what we talk about here are the short-lived pollutants, such as methane and black carbon, or soot that comes from combustion of materials. So these air pollution things can really help us in climate change in that, for example, methane is a short-lived gas, and if we can control that, we can bring down some of the pressures on climate in the next decade or two. Then we even get bigger as we move on to the step 3, which is that we must restore and protect natural ecosystems on planet Earth. So this is where, in nature, is where we store and sequester huge amounts of carbon. So for us to be successful in mitigating climate change, we need to preserve forests and ecosystems and wetlands and estuaries, and especially tropical forests and grasslands and savannas. So we talk about preserving nature as a very important part. Then the next one, number 4, we talk about the food system. Agriculture and food production is one of the biggest stressors on climate and the environment. So we talk about the need to for humans to lower their carbon footprint and environmental footprint by eating lower on the food chain and eating more plants and less meat. And we talk about the importance of sustainable agricultural practices. Then we go, and number 5, we move to the economy. And we think that continued economic growth, that model is seriously flawed when we have a finite biosphere. So our resources are finite, and we cannot continue to have economic growth as our goal forever. It just doesn't match up. So we are supporting green economics with our economic suggestions. And then finally, we talk about the population issue. The human population really took off in the 1800s with the start of the burning of fossil fuels and the Industrial Revolution. we had a population graph that just goes way, way up in the last couple hundred years. And that, a lot of that is due to us now using tons of fossil fuels. So we talk about the importance of us having a global discussion as to an appropriate population size for humans. And we talk about stabilizing population growth, potentially reducing it. And then with all of these suggestions and steps, we are emphasizing the need for social justice. We think there are great inequities that need to be looked at in terms of economic inequities and social inequities. And we just think that it's important to prioritize the well-being of humans all over. So that is the context that we're putting everything in. So that's our fix right there.
And of course, all of those things make sense, and what was advocated in '92 made sense, and earlier than that too. But there's a real issue, isn't there? Because many scientists and economists said that the real problem is that so much of the world's wealth, is that 90% is concentrated in 10%, 1% of the population. So it's a tiny percentage of the population that are just massively over consuming, and so that's the crux of the problem. So I think that there is a risk at the moment that people feel that we can, by greening the economy, we simply switch to renewable energy, get an EV, and carry on as before. And of course, we can't do that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
In order to fix this environmental problem that we have today, that it's going to take more than a technological fix of building more solar panels or more wind turbines. I don't think technology is going to save us, especially in the climate crisis. I think that's why I am keen on the idea of the 6 steps that we're mentioning. And green energy is just part of the first one in terms of the first step in the 6. So I think that we're going to need to have systemic changes, and it's not just going to be an easy technological fix. And it seems like people want that easy fix and want technology to save them. And just go on business as usual.
I think people like their creature comforts, but I think part of it is that we haven't really been presented with a kind of view of what life could be like. So I think what people are hearing are these very unhelpful political views. People saying, oh, you just want to go back and live in caves, and you want to just go back to medieval times, and sort of those kinds of ways of living. But just thinking about the coronavirus pandemic, which is still with us, and in the US it's been experienced really badly, and in the UK, we have been, it's been handled incredibly badly here. But the one really interesting thing that came out of what was a tragedy was that politicians for years have been saying that we can't do X, Y, and Z because it will crash the economy. And I couldn't believe that we moved into lockdown as quickly as we could in the UK. And it was almost as if the politicians actually found that they had a big red button, and they could push that button and they could stop the economy. And that's obviously what they have done. So I think, in a sense, what it's given us is it's given us some hope. It's shown us what can happen. It's not by any means a positive thing, but it's shown us that that it is possible to stop the economy. And I wondered if off the back of the climate emergency paper in November, where you're saying we've got a climate and ecological emergency, then we have the coronavirus pandemic and the World Health Organization saying this is a pandemic, and people responded appropriately to the pandemic. They responded and treated it as if it was an emergency, which of course it was. But why didn't they do that when you were sounding the alarm and saying, we've got a climate emergency? And then, you know, and arguably, well, it's not arguably, I would say, and I'm sure many would agree, that the climate and ecological crisis is a threat to life on the planet. It's a threat to, we're seeing massive rates of extinction. So why is it, do you have any thoughts as to why people responded differently to the coronavirus than they did to the climate and the declaration of climate emergency?
Yes, good question. I think the massive quick response to COVID-19 was mainly due to, because it's an immediate threat to the health and well-being of individuals. So that threat was so immediate and is so immediate that it gets a response, where climate is much more chronic and moving along at a different scale. And it's not such an individual personal threat for people like the virus is. But so I think that we did do some amazing behavioral changes for the coronavirus, and that gives me some hope that we can do changes. But the two problems are somewhat different, but in some ways they have solutions that are similar. So if you look at our 6 steps, when we talk about agriculture and food and population and economy, those can affect the risk of pandemics, just like the risk of climate crisis.
I think that is such a good point. And in talking to some psychologists recently, when I did an Ask a Scientist live event and put exactly that question to them, and they said, well, one of the issues with climate science is that if you report changes in CO2 levels, for an ordinary person, that doesn't seem very threatening. If you're reporting with death rates, that's threatening. That's meaningful. You know, in your town, in your neighborhood, you know, say 50% of the people, you know, wow, but a rise in CO2 levels, it's not immediately obvious how that's going to impact us and how it's going to affect us. Okay, the one last question I'd like to put to you, and it picks up on risk, and it picks up on some work. I think it was John Schellenhuber who's been talking about the difference between, we've got the reaction time and intervention time. So the reaction time is, you know, how much time we need to actually respond, and then intervention time is how much time we actually need to make it. And if there is so long as we have enough time to do an intervention, then we can still act. But once we've run out of that time, then, so recently an article came out which suggested that humanity within the next few years will reach a crossroads. We're going to have a decision foisted upon us, and we're going to have to decide whether we're going to continue down one route, which will be pretty much where we are, not doing things fast enough, or are we going to finally realize that life cannot go on as it currently is, and we're going to have to make a change. And I guess the question that I'm going to put to all the scientists I speak to is, which way do you think we're going to go? Which way do you have a sense of where you think humanity is actually going to go, and why?
Well, this is going to be a new experiment for humans. We've never been through this. And one thing I know is that nature is very resilient. And I see that all the time. And so that gives me hope that regardless of how fast we act and how much we do at any one period, that there is hope for the resilience of nature, and somehow it's going to work out. Now, on the other hand, I can't believe how dire this situation is, and it's causing people to have climate depression, and some people are giving up hope. I'm an optimist. I am going to continue to have hope, and at the same time, try to do what I can in terms of helping make the information that's needed available for huge changes on planet Earth. And then the second point I want to make is that I think that we will get much more reaction from individuals and governments after there's more suffering. So as we move into climate suffering, I think we will see a much bigger reaction than we have so far. So in terms of the timelines, are we going to have enough time to make the changes? I don't know about the timelines that you're outlining. I'm just thinking that we should put our heads down and do everything we can and see how it shakes out. Now, as a scientist, I find this climate breakdown very interesting, and the environmental breakdown interesting. But as a human, I'm horrified, and it's just very unsettling. And but again, as a human and a scientist, I just want to do what I can to make a small contribution to help towards a sustainable future.
Thank you. And I think that's a good note to end on. You know, obviously you've already made a huge contribution because you've been working relentlessly. You've put out those warnings. You've had many thousands of people globally endorse them, and we're doing what we can as Scientists Warning to put that message out there. And of course, you know, we have got some reason to have hope, I think, in the integrity of humanity, because we only have to look at Greta Thunberg and the striking school children, Fridays for Future, you know, all sorts of activist groups. I mean, people are trying, and I think it's important to us as a species to do what we can. We might not be able to do a huge amount for ourselves as a species, but the least we can do is protect life on the planet, which is essentially what we're about. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time and for speaking to us. This is the first in our new series of Heroes in Science. So to anyone watching, if you haven't subscribed, please look at the subscribe button and subscribe to Scientists Warning, and then we will notify you of all of our future recordings. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Alison. It's been a pleasure.